Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Johnny Fortune with the National Institute of Building Sciences, or NBIMS. NBIMS convenes subject matter experts to support advances in building science and technology. We also explore research-based innovations for the built environment. We're happy today to have a return guest to our podcast, Dr. John Messner. Welcome, Dr. John. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's nice to be back.
Thank you so much for joining us again. We had a previous episode with you where we had an overview of the National BIM Standard. And today we would like to take a deep dive into one of those modules, one of the components that's referred to as BEP or BIM Execution Planning. So you are probably one of the foremost authorities in the world. And this is so exciting for this podcast. We have the expert of BIM Execution Planning on this podcast. So glad you're here, John. No pressure, though. No pressure. But we want to talk about BIM Execution Planning. To give us, our audience, a little bit background, we use the term BIM a lot. And for you and I, that's everyday language, but some folks may not know what it is. So can you tell us briefly what is BIM?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for the kind comments there. But when we talk about BIM, we can really refer to that in different ways. That acronym BIM has been used to refer to three different things in the past. One being a building information model, which is really a digital model of an asset. So it could be a bridge, it could be a road, it could be a building, but really looking at what is the digital content that represents that asset. But it can also be building information modeling, a verb, which is how we go about the creation of that building information model. And now I think, and we've even seen within NBIMS, the rewording of building information management, looking at how we manage information throughout the entire life cycle of an asset. And so the building information management is much more broad and really looks at that overall information management practice and how we adopt that. And so I think when we think of BIM, I think it's really, the concept's matured over the years. And a lot of people initially just thought it's a software program that you can go in and create a model in. But the concept is so much broader than that.
Interesting. Thank you for that. How that has evolved. That's helpful for people to understand that when from a NBIMS perspective, we most commonly are referring to the management aspect or building information management, realizing that the model is an output and modeling is the process, to get to that output. So thanks for that clarification for our audience. I'm curious, John, how, looking back, how did you get involved in BIM many years ago?
Oh, it's interesting. My involvement with BIM started before the term BIM was used. Really, I had a chance here at Penn State University to do my graduate degree here, and we were looking at a lot of things related to information technology and how we represent data. And at the time, essentially looking at information modeling just as a broader concept. And so I think that was my earliest involvement with BIM, is back in the 90s, talking about how we represent that information and data. But more recently, I had a chance to come back to Penn State as a faculty member in the early 2000s. And when I returned here, we were doing some things with 4D modeling. And as we refer to BIM, BIM can be used for a lot of different tasks on a project or throughout an asset's life cycle. Anything from, creating a design using a BIM authoring tool to doing energy analysis to creating 4D models. 4D model, the fourth dimension is time, so that we can look at construction sequencing and how we are going to plan out the construction of that project. And so when I came back to Penn State, I had a chance to work on some 4D modeling research, and then that really kicked off some of the work that we're doing now.
So Penn State has been a long time leader in this space, and you yourself kind of at the helm of that. I remember at the time, when it gained popularity, working at an architecture firm for many years, and we began to look at BIM. And I remember Penn State was one of the places where you could go and retrieve information and learn about BIM and how to start applying it. So how did all that begin?
It was interesting. After I was at Penn State for a couple of years, I got a call from a close friend in industry, Steve Hagan, actually, who was at GSA at the time. And he was interested in really pushing some of the limits of BIM adoption on our project at GSA. And he called me up to ask me if there was any resource that we had available or that was out there to really provide some guidance on how to adopt BIM on that project. Steve was a leader at the time in BIM, so it's not as if he was just getting started, but looking for some additional resources. And so at the time, and this is back in about probably 2006, 2007, there weren't really any great books or guides that tell people or help people along in starting that journey to adopting BIM on projects. And so fortunately, that same exact week, I got a call from Steve, and I had to tell him there weren't any resources that I was aware of that helped. I got a call from the Charles Pankow Foundation, who's a funder of research and development initiatives in the industry, and they wanted to do some work with BIM, some research on BIM to really help in the adoption. So I combined those two phone calls, and we got some resources to go out and create the BIM Execution Planning Guide, which was a guideline document that really aimed to support project teams and owners in looking at how they plan out the implementation of BIM on their projects.
Yeah, I remember viewing that document. I remember having a project requirement for developing a BIM execution plan and needing to understand what that meant. And I found the guide that you guys had developed back then to be very helpful in explaining and breaking down the different pieces and components to walk me through developing a BIM execution plan, the very first one. So it turned out to be an incredible resource and has had really an incredible impact on the industry. Many people that don't know about the National BIM standard are still yet familiar with a BIM execution plan. So it's been quite far-reaching. That work has reached a lot of folks.
Yeah, thanks. It's been interesting when you, I think out of our research group, it's probably the most popular resource that people have referenced.
Just curious, any idea, like number of downloads? Yeah, I know you may not have that number handy. I'm just curious how far that thing has really reached.
So we have a database of people that sign up when they download, which is now optional, of about 60,000 people that have downloaded the guide from our website. But
oh, wow.
It's also out there in a lot of other places, like the U.S. National BIM Standard version 2 and 3 and other places. So.
Yeah, it's really hard to quantify the reach, and just when one person downloads and it gets shared different ways, and like you said, part of the National BIM Standard, which we're excited about from NBIMS. I mean, the National BIM Standard is a product of NBIMS that is created through consensus process, convening subject matter experts together and volunteers. And so can you tell us a little of the history of how did the work that you did at Penn State in developing the guide as well as a template, which was extremely helpful, by the way, how did those make their way into the National BIM Standard? What's the story behind that?
Well, I think we had a team here that worked on the development of the BIM Execution Planning Guide and template document. And actually, I also want to give a big shout out to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the USACE industry consortium that I know you were a member of for a long time, because they really helped us go through and line by line by line painstakingly review everything that was in that template, which I think was so important and so valuable to the research project to enable us to create a resource that industry that could be easily implemented and that was vetted by industry to a pretty extensive measure. So I think once we created that guide and template, then I think what really happened is a number of people started adopting it. USACE adopted it very early. Here at Penn State, we adopted it very early within our facilities group, and then more and more people started adopting that approach. Essentially, it just laid out a common way that people can document their planning process and walk through a structured procedure to create that plan. And so, as far as how it got into the National BIM standard, once we did that in probably 2010 or so, there was a call out for content for the National BIM standard. So we proposed that and took it through the consensus process to get it adopted in version 2 of the National BIM standard.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers. Certainly, I'm familiar with them and have worked with them for several years in their version of the BIM Execution Plan. I've also seen it in many other federal agencies and many other project requirements, and to the point that even the AE firms that I've worked at in the past adopted that as a standard process for any project, any BIM project, which arguably is almost all project now, that there must be a BEP, a BIM Execution Plan. Have you seen it evolve in other ways over the years, John, and different ways that's been applied? I mean, I can't imagine that, as you guys were developing this, you would see and foresee that it would have this kind of reach, but it certainly has reached so many that people, even when it's not a contract requirements, and the AE firms I worked in the past, as an example, many people adopt it because it becomes a best practice of planning, a best practice of BIM.
Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly have been quite a few owners that now require a BIM execution plan and require the team to go through that formal process. But even if they don't require it, still a best practice, like you said, to create that plan with your team members, just to do that. So we certainly see a lot of people leveraging the content, but it has evolved. Many people, I mean, we originally released the BIM Execution Planning Guide in 2009. We have updated it a couple of times, but there's a lot of things that have changed in BIM years since 2009, right? So when we look at that, a lot of owners have gone back in, and project teams have gone back in and customized or changed things in that in their templates to meet their needs. And so it's been fun to watch that, but it has caused a bit of I don't want to say a challenge, but it has become a little not as much of a standard since that initial version, which has really given us the opportunity with our new version of the BIM Execution Plan to incorporate some of those updates from others.
Yeah. So the new version being, we had a previous episode, and I encourage our audience, if you've not seen or heard that, go over, listen to that episode. Very good overview of the National BIM Standard, and just a great discussion with John overall. But diving a little deeper now into the BIM Execution Plan, it is a part of the National BIM Standard version 4, the current version. So can you share with us some of the components that are new in this version that's going back into the National BIM Standard?
Yeah, maybe I'll share a little bit about how it was created, which will will tell you maybe what some of the new things are. We've wanted to do this for a number of years, and so I really am glad we had the opportunity to do this with version 4. We created a work group of industry leaders that are volunteers, and I want to thank all of those volunteers that are on the work group. But we created that work group, and then what we did is we did a content analysis of leading templates that people had customized for their own needs. So for example, in 2009, USACE adopted our template, but through the years, they added and changed that template, and many others did as well. And a lot of them, almost all of them that we looked at, had our core template as a starting point, but they made a lot of improvements to it. So we went in and we analyzed what improvements were made. We brought all of those together and with our industry experts talked about how could we make the best common version of this BIM execution plan, incorporating additions and revisions from everybody. So it really gave us an opportunity to take a fresh look at it and to create what we feel is maybe the best new version of what should be in a BIM execution plan. And we also, with this version, we made some changes. Lots of people have asked us in the past, was the BIM execution planning guide a standard, or was it just a guideline? And I think what we did is we've now published what is a standard, and we've created a guidance document for it. And so we've really looked at how can we be a little more clear on putting together these different pieces and parts.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You mentioned, and I've heard these conversations quite often, the debate about whether it's a standard and guidance. So you've mentioned an important piece that your work group has done is to go and separate the piece that is about providing guidance from the actual standard. Are there other pieces of this? And we, from our previous episode, we know that there's a module inside the National BIM standard that is committed or devoted to the BIM execution planning. So can you talk about some of the other content that may be in there? What can people expect when they go to the National BIM standard and they go to the BEP module?
Yeah, so when they go to the BEP module, they'll first get a brief introduction of what the BIM execution planning module is all about and who it's developed for. And then they'll be able to see the standard. So the standard is really the content that is either required or optional that should be incorporated into a BIM execution plan. And by a standard, I mean, I mentioned this before in our previous discussions, it means it can be tested against. It means we can test compliance. So if I'm an owner and I say I would like a BIM execution plan, then the standard will tell you what should be in that plan, and it's pretty specific. And then an owner could also select some of the optional items as well. The guidelines really walk a team through how to develop or create that content. So it has a 5-step procedure on how a team can look at their goals, how they can identify BIM uses or use cases that they're going to adopt, map out a process, look at information exchanges and all the infrastructure and processes needed to be successful. So that's the guidance, really guides the team through the creation process. But then we also try to make this as easy as we can for teams to adopt. We put together a template. That's a spreadsheet template that teams can walk through to be able to capture the results of their planning activities as they're going through them. And we actually are going to have a brand new information exchange that we don't expect any specific team to use, but is really created for software vendors or others who want to create tools to exchange a BIM execution plan from one piece of software to another. So not a tool that a lot of people will use, but will be important for someone if they want to create a database of their BIM execution plans.
Oh, interesting. That would be incredibly helpful to create that feedback loop, right? So that promote that continuous improvement, which you guys have experienced by gathering all the BEPs from different folks over the years and letting that analyzing it and letting it inform what goes into the latest version of the BEP. So some people don't know anything about the BEP. Is this so for them? Is this is this during design only? Is this during construction? I mean, what's really the intent of this of the BEP? Or is it transcend one phase or another of a project?
Yeah, the BEP is ideally put together early in a project, and you may have new players join the project in the planning and design process is when you might start the development, hopefully, of the BIM execution plan. Decide what information you want to capture and model and how you're going to do that throughout the design as well as the construction process and into the handover of that information to the owner for the operations of the project. So it's a BIM execution plan is not just for one phase of a project, but it should talk about how you are going to set up a workflow and the infrastructure to be successful at implementing BIM throughout the delivery of a project.
Yeah, so it serves as a roadmap for executing the project, right? Yeah. So very interesting. I know a lot of I have heard folks that in the past who have said the time it takes to develop it, to develop a BEP. Maybe they haven't seen the value in it. I guess if you could speak to that audience that is unsure of the value, what would you say is probably the number one thing that really provides value when you go through this process?
I mean, I think it's critical for people to be communicating and discussing how they're going to adopt BIM on the project. And so I think the whole process is set up to encourage conversation and to have people document that. It's been interesting. I've also seen a good story from one person who was very complimentary of having a BIM execution plan was that their project was several years long. They went through different project managers, different team members, and the BIM execution plan really helped them document and keep a consistent process through that as different people change, as different organizations come in and out of a project. But it's that one place where people can go reference the plan on how they're going to manage information.
Yeah, and for the latest version, do you feel like it's scalable? I mean, does this apply to the small projects, medium projects, large projects?
I certainly do think it's scalable, and what we've done in the standard is that we've made some items required because they're really core to being successful, and we've made a lot of things optional in the standard. But we wanted to give a standard way to reference the optional content so that when people use those optional items that they use them in a consistent manner. So it can be, and when people go to look at the standard, you may look at it and say, wow, there's a lot of things in this, but really only a certain number of them are considered really core and required. And for those bigger projects, the optional ones are probably really valuable for people to implement. If it's a smaller project, maybe you don't need to do that deep of a dive into your BIM execution plan, and you can just use a part of it. But our tools, our standard, our template include all of the items. Some owners or project teams may want to delete some of those items back out if they don't need to do it.
So this the BIM execution planning, which again is a module within the new version of the National BIM Standard, and depending on when our audience is listening to this podcast, it's about to be released or it's recently been released. And so when they go and look at the National BIM Standard, and this is one of several modules, how would you say that the BEP relates to the other content within the National BIM standard?
I mean, I think the BEP is a really important process and planning document when implemented that really helps document a lot of the other decisions. And so when we look at the National BIM standard, there's a couple sections that are really important. The Project BIM requirements help inform teams on what should be within their requirements. And one really core part of that is that the team should create a BIM execution plan. And the BIM uses is a key part of the BIM execution plan, as well as COBE may be an exchange that's documented in the BIM execution plan. So it really provides that glue to kind of bring the different pieces and parts together on a project implementation so that the team can make sure that they're following a good plan.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the hub of all that information for any given project. Like it is the guidepost, the roadmap document that connects all the other pieces.
Yeah.
So just switching gears for a moment here, and we do really, like to probe this from our guests from time to time. The industry is certainly facing a lot of challenges, or some may refer to them as opportunities. And then, there's hopefully solutions for each one of those. But, given your expertise and your background, I'm curious, what do you feel like are some of the challenges and the opportunities the industry is facing? How can they be solved? And if it ties back to the BIM execution plan and NBIMS, and help us make that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think our industry faces a lot of both challenges and opportunities. I mean, I think infrastructure and buildings are so critical to our society, and one of our challenges is that there's a lot of things that need to be built and only so many resources that we have. So we need to be really efficient in how we leverage those resources in our industry. And I think a part of that is we have lagged other industries quite significantly in the level of digitalization that we have in our systems. And so I think as we create more digital ways to share information, to create information, to review it, to review projects, I think it opens up a lot of new opportunities. Lots of talk out there in the industry about AI and how that's going to change what we're doing, but we need to be digital to be able to leverage AI.
Yeah, and it sounds like the BEP is a critical piece on the project level to help organize that, to avoid waste, to find ways to be more efficient, to plan those pieces. How the content or data is captured, stored, shared, utilized. It sounds like the BEP is a strong instrument for solving some of the challenges we face.
Yeah, I think it is. It really organizes that workflow to enable that we have structured data and information. And once we have that structured data and information, we can use it for so many things, like anything from learning about previous projects to digital fabrication to automation. And so we can do a lot of things, but we first need to make sure that we have everything digitally.
Sure. Yeah, and you mentioned AI. It'd be very interesting to see, the output of AI, consuming a lot of BIM execution plans, and what was the output of how things are documented, and identifying some best practices from that. Well, John, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you again today. Thank you for coming back again for another session on our podcast, and always like to have some bonus content for those who hang around for the entire episode. And thank you so much for all your work on the National BIM Standard, for your work on the BIM Execution Planning, even before it became a part of the National BIM Standard, and a long history. I'm just curious, man, with what is next for you? Like, what is on the horizon? What's piquing your interest? As we near this publication of National BIM Standard version 4, which you've worked incredibly hard at. what's on the radar for John Messner?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that I'm interested in. There's a lot of things that pique my interest, but one thing that I'm having the chance to do here at Penn State is we're really forming or re-envisioning one of our centers for industrialized construction. So looking at how we use some of this information to start and feed automation processes, either prefabrication in factories to automation and robotics that are out on job sites to capture information and put things in place. So I think it's a really exciting area. But again, we really need that foundation of solid information to make that successful.
Yeah, I appreciate that approach because it's so critical. I mean, many of us have seen the statistics, the estimates for the large number of anticipated folks that are retiring and a diminishing workforce. And it is, some people may be afraid of technology advances and feel like it is, it's coming for their job. But in reality, we just don't have enough workforce. We have to innovate, to be able to keep up with the demand. And I'm hearing from folks in the industry that that's one of the real challenges right now, even though there's legislation recently to, promote work and infrastructure, that people just cannot get enough folks to perform the work, and there's a real challenge there. So I appreciate you guys getting out in front of that and the research that you're doing. I appreciate the partnership and the sharing of information with NBIMS and the contribution to the National BIM Standard. And thank you so much for this unpacking of the BIM Execution Planning. A lot of great information. We just encourage our audience to go take a look at it in the National BIM Standard and begin to use it and provide feedback on how it can continue to evolve and become better. John, thank you so much for your time today. Any additional comments you want to share with our audience here?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to join you here today. And I think I just also want to share, the BIM Execution Plan update, as well as all of the sections of the National BIM Standard, have just taken a lot of effort from a lot of volunteers, a lot of the NBIMS staff members. So I really appreciate everything that the volunteers have done to help develop this content and in the future maintain this content and new content areas. And thank you for all of your time, Johnny, that you've invested in this as well.
It's been a pleasure. It's a great journey that we're on together, and glad we're going there together. So thank you to our audience. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. Again, if you missed the previous episode with Dr. John Messner, a lot of information about the National BIM Standard. I would encourage you to go and listen to it and subscribe to this podcast channel and the YouTube channel. There are little nuggets in the YouTube, the video that you'll notice that you won't hear in the audio. So thanks for tuning in. Continue to tune in for future episodes where we will continue to talk about the work of the National Institute of Building Sciences and what's happening in the industry, the challenges, opportunities, solutions, and emerging technologies. Thanks so much, and see you soon.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.